it very strongly. You say kind of, I mean, as I read it, not only are we not only are we deeply fallible when we try to understand ourselves, but you seem to be saying that there is no objective solution. You know, there are multiple things you say, right? You say it's maybe unethical to settle on an objective solution in the way that we've said, you know, about things like social Darwinism, but beyond, and then it's difficult too, because we're all fallible humans with our own personal stories, and there's all this unconscious emotional stuff going on. I think, well, yeah, when we're trying to come up with theories about ourselves, and if a theory tells you, if you come up with, you're not going to come up with a theory that you find really like morally off-putting about yourself, I think, right? Like it's hard to that's just not how our minds tend to go. We like to kind of go towards rewarding things, and I think where I settle with that is, you know, as someone interested in there being objective truths when it comes to things like consciousness and free will and stuff like that, I see it more that I think you're right, that like the fact that humans are trying to address themselves, it's very different than doing physics about, you know, if you're trying to well, I was going to say if you're going to try and study the climate, but actually even then human emotion gets in the way of of arguing about what's the truth when it comes to the climate. But if you try to understand the physics of a system that no one really cares about emotionally, you're going to have a better chance of finding the objective truth. So I think it gets in the way, absolutely. And I also think at the moment that the time we're living in, I think consciousness is very much like, you know, humans have always had this need to justify their being different to the rest of the animal kingdom, right? And, you know, before Galileo and Copernicus, it was like, we're at the center of the universe. And then before Darwin, it was like, we're categorically different to other animals. The way that I see people going about thinking about consciousness, it always has this implicit kind of, what is it that's so special about the human brain? What is it that's so special about us? It's a kind of unexamined assumption. I mean, it does get examined every now and then, but to me, that's a kind of a real stumbling block that people, I think, are trying to understand consciousness and how it relates to the physical world. Unconsciously, a lot of people are trying to, they've kind of, it's a foregone conclusion that they think the solution is going to justify humanity's specialness. And so you get things like integrated information theory, which is about human brains are very complex, very integrated, you know, so it turns out that we're kind of more conscious than other systems. But I don't think that means there isn't a truth. I just think it means that it's hard to get to it, I think, for humans.
Yeah, I should say that I'm not a hardcore postmodernist, although I have become more postmodern as I get older. But I became a science journalist because I think science actually figures things out. It doesn't just make shit up. It discovers truths about nature. And so I think, you know, the sort of atomic theory of matter, the double helix and its role in heredity, evolution by natural selection, general relativity, quantum mechanics, these are discoveries. These are reflections of things that are actually going on out there that can be empirically substantiated. That's one reason why my first book was called The End of Science, and it's based on this idea that science discovers things, and eventually you know the world well enough so that it becomes harder to surpass what you've already discovered. This is like the antithesis of a postmodern point of view. But I am a postmodernist when it comes to when science turns its gaze back on itself. When we try to understand ourselves, then I think that the postmodern critique, which is this kind of skepticism that says that our knowledge is always kind of a reflection of where we are culturally and of power dynamics in a society. They're all different versions of postmodernism, but it's kind of saying that we don't really discover anything. We invent things. You know, we have these stories that we tell about the universe, that are embodied in science and religion and other modes of knowledge. But so I reject that when it comes to lots of science, lots of chemistry and biology and physics. But psychology and psychiatry and all the sciences of humanity, I think the postmodernists are just absolutely right. For you, I guess my question would be, I don't think you can be a real postmodernist as a scientist. So then it's a question of where you draw the line. I mean, what do you, for example, think that there can be, I don't know, an objective, empirically validated answer to the question of free will, or that we will ever have a complete description of the neural code, how you go from physiological events in the brain to the kinds of mental states that both of us are experiencing right now?
Yeah, so I think there are two kind of interesting aspects to that. I think there's a sense in which you can be kind of a postmodernist, I guess, as a scientist, in the sense that I think it's really important to realize that there is no view from nowhere. With science, we feel like what we're doing is we're staying aloof from everything, and we're we have this kind of God's eye view of nature. And what we see with things like quantum mechanics as well is that we're so deeply embedded in nature that as soon as you try to measure something at the smaller scale, you mess with it in such a way that it's impossible. You're so deeply in it. And what you can realize then, and the kind of one of the fascinating things about consciousness, given that we build each of our own realities from a conscious perspective, there's only a kind of hall of mirrors of different conscious perspectives, really. Like, that's what I would say what exists when it comes to telling stories about the world, is this kind of hall of mirrors of different conscious perspectives. But the exhilarating thing is that, what you refer to as kind of empirical evidence, we can all be solipsists and think we're the only mind in existence, but then you start bumping into things. I bump into something and then you bump into it, and we say, hey, we check notes against each other and we say, there seems to be something else going on here. It seems there's more. I can't know it directly because all I know is my personal perspective. But if we all get together, we can make empirical claims, right, about and divorce our understanding of the world from our own personal biases and our own personal perspective. And that's, to me, the thing that's exhilarating about science. And I'm actually quite optimistic. Like, I do think the short answer, that's the long answer, but the short answer is yes, actually, I do think we can come up with correct or true explanations of what we are, because I have the way I tend to think about humans is very much as a kind of another, I try to think about them dispassionately as another kind of thing to be studied. Like if there was another hominid, if like Homo habilis or another kind of human species was still alive, we would study them well, this is starting to sound quite dark, like the eugenic stuff you spoke about before, but we wouldn't in the same way we can study a chimpanzee, you can just take us as this form that came out of nature, and there'll be things that you can make claims about it that are more true or less true. So I do think that we can kind of come up with answers to these things. But when it comes to something like free will, I think, so I've read you write that I think you describe yourself as a hardcore believer in free will, whereas
Yes.
I'm kind of convinced that it just doesn't fit in with my worldview. So you said, could there ever be empirical evidence? And to me, it's like it's already solved. That it just doesn't exist. Is my but that's me speaking from a particular worldview, where I think that there's this kind of bottom-up evolutionary process of the physical world unfolding that leaves no room for it.